Good evening. Is my volume okay, Manny? Kojo? Good. It's nice to see so many friends here. I'm curious, who's here for the first time? Oh, two. You've been here before, Sam. Not to this. Welcome, Sam. And what are your names? Anastasia. Rin. Welcome. And welcome back to the rest. We are just coming out of Rohatsu Sesshin. Who sat Rohatsu with us? Beautiful. So that was 2 days ago that we emerged from a very beautiful, very deep week of sitting to celebrate the Buddha's enlightenment. And we sat here and all over the world, December 1st through 8th. At Zen temples, people sit Rohatsu Sesshin. And I can say for myself, and being here with the residents who also sat, we're all a little wonky still. Ruth is nodding as we emerge. So I thank you in advance for your tolerance of my wonkiness. And I want to start by thanking Roshi Joan, in particular today, for this tireless commitment to convene, to gather people around the Dharma. And I also today want to thank the residents. It's a wild thing to come and live here as an adult and to be told what to wear and what to eat and what room you're in and what your schedule is. And by Dōgen or me or others, if you're like, I'm going to take this off, and you're like, maybe not. And it's a really potentially beautiful and transformative thing. And from the outside, I think it can look maybe like a fairy tale at times, but it's often not. It's often quite difficult, actually, to be in this container, to be deep in this container. So thank you to the current residents, and I see 5 or 6 former residents who are still coming back. Thank you for still coming back. And I would like to talk today about 2 pieces of writing. One called the Komyōzō Zanmai by Koun Ejō, and a little bit a fascicle by Dogen Zenji called Komyō. And I'll talk about what those mean in a minute and who those people are. But first, a couple sentences from Changsha, who was a 9th century Chinese Chan master, Zen master. The entire world of the 10 directions is the radiant light of the self. The entire world of the 10 directions is within the radiant light of the self. In the entire world of the 10 directions, there is not a single being that is not the self. So we'll be talking about that radiant light today. But first, a little bit about Koun Ejō. Hear you staring at me curiously. I wanted to do something first. Can everyone close their eyes for a second? Nothing weird's going to happen. Can you raise your hand if in any way you consider yourself to be a kind of spiritual person or have a spiritual practice or some orientation towards spirituality? Can you raise your hand? Okay. No, leave them up. Can you keep your hand, close your eyes, Kojo. Can you keep your hand raised if in your practice, in your relationship to spirituality, you feel like there's something missing? There's something that you need to achieve that you haven't. Okay. Beautiful. You can put your hands down, open your eyes. So most of the room raised their hand around spirituality, and about half left their hand up. There's something missing. There's something to attain. And that's part of what I want to talk about today. But first, these people, Koun Ejō. Let's start with Dogen Zenji. Dogen Zenji is the father, Eihei Dogen, the father of Soto Zen. 1200 to 1253, I believe, were his dates. A Japanese monk, and for us, the person who brought Chan Buddhism, Zen Buddhism from China to Japan, and was the kind of seat of Japanese Zen, which we still practice a style of today. And he wrote prolifically, and this is one of his writings. This is a translation by Sensei Kazu Tanahashi, who is just with us, the Shobo Genzo, but this is not all he wrote. And in particular, fascinating or inspiring because he died when he was 52, 53, 54 years old. Koun Ejō was his Dharma heir, and I knew honestly nothing about him other than we chant his name in our lineage when we chant the identity of relative and absolute. Dogen Zenji, honored one. Koun Ejō, honored one. So he is the Dharma heir to Dogen Zenji. And interestingly, the last ancestor who is written about in the Denko Roku, which is a book by Keizan Zenji. So Dogen, Koun Ejō, Tetsu Gikai, Keizan Joken. So these four, this lineage in 13th to 14th century Japan is where we're living right now. Keizan Zenji wrote this volume, Denko Roku, which is translated, at least in one place, as Record of the Transmission of the Light. So we're on theme right now. And it's a collection of 53 enlightenment stories from Shakyamuni Buddha to the 53rd, which is Koun Ejō. So he's the last one in that volume. He was born into a noble family, Keizan Zenji reports, and became a monk when he was 17 or 18. Again, this is Ejō. He was an accomplished student and practitioner. He had studied Tendai Buddhism at Mount Hiei, which is also where Dogen started. He had studied Pure Land Buddhism and apparently had had profound realization with Zen master Kakuen. Not Hakuen, but Kakuen, who I'm not familiar with. He was born 1198, died in 1282. So he's 2 years older than Dogen. Dogen returns to Japan when he's 27 years old, 1227. And people are whispering about this person who went to China, had great realization, and is bringing true practice back to Japan. And so Ejō apparently goes to see what this guy is all about, what's going on, because he apparently considered himself an accomplished practitioner with great realization. And Keizan Zenji writes, when they first talked, for 2 or 3 days, Dogen's understanding was just the same as Ejō's. But after several days, Dogen revealed some very unusual understanding. Ejō was startled, but as he began to challenge Dogen, he found that Dogen had a truth quite different from and beyond his own. So this is 1227, and Ejō asks to study with Dogen, and Dogen is still in his wandering period and says, now is not the time, but if I set up a place, a temple, please come. And so Dogen does set up a temple, and Keizan says, for 2 years, nobody came. And then Ejō, Koun Ejō, is the first person who comes to study with Dogen. And for the last 20 years of Dogen's life, from 1234 to around 1254, Koun Ejō is his attendant, is his closest student. And what I loved about reading Keizan Zenji's account is the way he characterizes Ejō. It's like we have Dogen Zen because of Koun Ejō. He was the anchor. He was the glue in the monastery. Keizan says he's the person that all the monks went to. And he was so dedicated to Dogen, and after Dogen's death for 30 years, continues the style of practice that Dogen brought back. And it really touched me, this person who I at least kind of knew nothing about, protecting and incubating the practice of Dogen Zenji. And Keizan writes, Dogen's attitude towards Ejō was almost like that of a student to a teacher. Dogen as the student, Ejō as the teacher. The paths of teacher and apprentice joined, the lights of their minds and eyes merging like water in water, like space meeting space. With no disagreement at all between them, only Ejō knew the mind of Dogen, which is beyond the knowledge of others. So this is Koun Ejō, who we'll talk about today. Dogen we have reams of writing from, and apparently from Koun Ejō we have one piece of writing. And it's this text, Komyōzō Zanmai. So Komyō, radiance, radiant light, or luminosity. Zō is treasury or storehouse. Zanmai is samadhi. Many translations of samadhi, more commonly awareness, concentration, one-pointedness. There's a wonderful Theravadan monk named Bhante Vimalaramsi, who I've studied, who translates samadhi as collectedness or composure with sharp and open awareness. I love that translation. But the translators who did this piece, the Komyōzō Zanmai that I'm referencing, who are Anzan Hoshi, Hoshin Roshi, and Yasuda Joshu Dainin Roshi, translated as the practice of the Treasury of Radiant Light. The practice of the Treasury of Radiant Light. And then the 37th fascicle in the Shobo Genzo, this big book to my left that Dogen wrote, is called Komyō. And this is what, in the very beginning, which I'll read in a moment, Ejō's referencing. And so Ejō starts by saying the Shobo Genzo already contains an essay on radiant light. I am writing this only because I want to bring out this essential matter further. Because the practice of the treasury of radiant light is the essence of the Buddha way. So this is how this piece opens. And he continues, it's around 20 pages long. I'll say, having sat with it a bit, Dogen has a kind of eloquence that I did not see reflected in Ejō's piece. It's a little bit harder to get through. But this beautiful exploration pulling from what we were just looking at last week, the Avatamsaka Sutra and the Lotus Sutra, and the Chan ancestors and the early Buddhist teachings, all of these, weaving together all of these teachings on radiant light. So he's referencing the sutras, the words of other masters, offering some of which we'll hear, some strong critiques of current trends and practices that he observes as Dogen Zenji did. And there's a lot of inspiration in it and a lot of grumpiness. And so if that sounds interesting or fun to you, please do look it up. There's only a couple translations right now. And I understand that Shohaku Okamura recently did a translation of this piece, though it hasn't been made public yet. And it ends with a one-page practice instruction, which is what I want to focus on today. Just some lines from it. We won't go through the whole thing. And I've pulled some other pieces, particularly of the grumpiness, from the piece, just so we can get a flavor of what's going on. So this is Ejō. I sincerely offer these words of advice to those who wish to truly practice. Do not be pulled around by states of mind or objects. Do not rely on intellectual knowledge. Don't show in your hands what you receive on your seat in the monk's hall. Just throw body and mind into the great treasury of radiant light and don't look back. Just throw body and mind into the great treasury of radiant light and don't look back. I was having a conversation with one of my dear Dharma friends and teachers who's in the room but shall remain nameless. And I was talking about this, and we've really had a lot of conversations over these years, and she can make this face when there's this disagreement with what I'm saying bubbling up. That's my read of it, at least. And I was watching the face kind of turn, and I said, well, what are you thinking? And she said, I hear things like radiant light, and I think that's not my experience, at least most of the time. It just feels far away, and it can fall a little flat. We also have this wonderful Chan ancestor, Hangzhe, who writes, beautifully, metaphorically, poetically. And so I don't know about this radiant light thing. And so I was sitting with this question, because it's an experience I can have also. Like, I don't know, I'm not looking out at all of you right now and seeing rainbows coming out of your heads, and um, some of you look engaged and some of you look bored, and it's all fine. And a lot of smiling faces and beautiful eyes. Um, so like, what is this that's being characterized? And I really sat with that question because it's in Dogen so clearly, it's in these other ancestors. They come back and there's this incredible language. And they keep saying it's right here. It's right here. And often we ask this question, something like, what does this have to do with my life? We read this text, what does this have to do with my life? How does this pertain to my life? And I mentioned during practice period, I think it's a beautiful question, and sometimes I can feel a kind of edge in it. These ancestors have something to prove to me. They have to prove why they're relevant to me. And so in sitting with that and kind of reframing the question of like, well, what am I missing? So if Ejō says, this is the heart of the Buddha way and it is right here, what am I missing? Changsha says, the whole world in the 10 directions is the radiant light of the self. And so then it came to be like, well, what am I missing? Which then opened up, what do I take for granted? Fundamentally, what do I take for granted? And to sit with this and to explore this and to get to kind of the central, most fundamental thing that I take for granted is that I'm alive, that I have life, actually. And as a part of that life, I have these faculties that I can see. And I was thinking about one of these times I went back and was holding my, at that point, 1-year-old nephew. We were outside on a summer day in Connecticut, and it was beautiful and trees everywhere. And I'm watching him for 40 minutes straight. Just look. Just look at everything. Seeming, I have no idea what was going on in that little brain. I don't know about, developmental psychology of children. But man, he looked engrossed that whole time we were outside. And I just thought, this is not my experience of the world. I take for granted that I have sight. I take for granted that there's anything that I can see. And I've lived here for 4.5 years. I take it for granted the trees and the grass and what it looks like and the zendo every day. And so at first just had this sense, oh, what if what Ejō and these other ancestors are pointing us towards is this not taking for granted that we have life? Whether we're sighted or not, that we have some sense of a world that we're in, that we can rest in that and appreciate that and not be quite so, at least in my case, I won't speak for all of you, be quite so dismissive of like, seen that? I know what that tree looks like. And this quote from Maizumi Roshi, my Dharma great-grandfather, I believe. Koto's nodding. Appreciate your life. Which I always took around like, oh, I should appreciate the kind of conditions of my life. Whatever they are, I should appreciate the conditions of my life. All of a sudden became, can I appreciate that I am alive? Quite literally. That there is life in this heart, body, mind. And Hefker today gave me this quote from Wittgenstein. Thank you, Hefker. It is not how things are in the world that is mystical, but that it exists. It is not how things are in the world that is mystical, but that it exists. And so just feeling that around this question of radiant light and what it has to do with my experience and maybe what I'm being invited into. Dogen Zenji in his fascicle on radiant light says, even though people had been carrying the radiant light within their heads and encountering it all the time, they still did not practice it as their own eyeballs. Thus, they do not clarify the shape and function of radiant light. Because they avoided encountering the radiant light, their radiant light was missing radiant light. Although missing itself is radiant light, they were immersed in missing. So just that last part, because they avoided encountering the radiant light, maybe we can understand this of the radiant light that's just inherent in being alive. Because these folks, these people avoided encountering that fundamental aliveness. Their aliveness was missing their aliveness. Their life was missing their life. And Dogen, in a way that I've come to appreciate, an act of generosity, says, this missing life is life itself. It's not separate from life. It's not outside. There is no outside. So that is life too. But they were immersed in missing. So here's a bit from Ejō. In hearing and reading these famous teachings, everybody studies them as if they were intended for someone else. You do not release yourself into totality or yield into freedom and ease, or yield into freedom and ease. Instead, you mutter that you are missing some essential trick or skill, or that you are just a beginner, or that you've started to practice too late in life. And so you remain usual people who have not shed a single deluded view. We're getting grumpy already, but we're going to keep going. You do not release your assumptions of self-image. Although you dwell always in the great treasury of radiant light, you sell yourself out for hard labor, wander in misery, always poor. Although born into wealth and ease, through your own views of poverty, you turn the body of clear radiance into a carrier of buckets of night soil, a shithole cleaner. And then he says what to do. The view of a self should just be released right now. The view of a self should just be released right now. So this is Koun Ejō somehow. It's further along than I thought. So I'm going to skip a section, but I want to read you just to couple sentences because I love this imagery in his practice instruction at the end. Just breathing in, just breathing out, just so. Sitting under the open sky, weightless as a flame. Just breathing in, just breathing out, just so. Sitting under the open sky, weightless as a flame. And later in that instruction, he writes, you cannot grasp it, it being radiant light. You cannot grasp it. Grasp. You cannot throw it away. It is unattainable. Although it is unattainable, it penetrates this whole body. From the highest heaven to the deepest hell, all realms are illuminated perfectly. This is wondrous and inconceivably subtle radiant light. You cannot grasp it. You cannot throw it away. You can't attain it. And though it is unattainable, it penetrates this whole body and all the worlds in the 10 directions. So I've been talking about trust a fair amount in the talks that I've given, but this is where this leads me back to. I just have this sense of, does anyone do trust falls? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of just trust falling back into radiant light, which is actually right into the center of our life right now, right here as it is. And just this full kind of throwing our life force into our life force, which of course is already there. And so for me, how to do that, it's just this utter relaxation into this place. And it's Dogen and Genjo Koan saying, when you find your place where you are, practice occurs. Not when you get somewhere else, or you attain a thing, or you have a glorious vision of radiant light beaming out of everybody's foreheads, which does happen in the Mahayana Sutras and is cool. I'd like to see it. When you find your place where you are. And there's this innocence to me, the innocence of my nephew, just gazing. At the trees. Not this kind of calculating, I do this to get that in practice. Oh, I'll sit today because this will be the one. Or I'll do Rohatsu because I'm going to get it during this Rohatsu. I'll sit through the night because this is the time. We had I think it was 5 residents beautifully sit through the night till the morning star rose the next day on the last night of Rohatsu. And for me, this quote from the Tenzo Kyokan came up. Dogen is telling a story of wandering through China and meeting this wonderful Tenzo, this wonderful cook, who's kind of showing him up a bit in, we'll call it Dharma combat. And so Dogen says, what is practice? And the Tenzo says, there is nothing in the world that is hidden. There is nothing in the world that is hidden. So that kind of, for me, innocence, that kind of appreciation. Uchiyama Roshi, who did this translation, says it's derived from an expression meaning that the truth of life manifests itself. The truth of life manifests itself in all places and in all things, just as they are. Can we allow ourselves to be open to that? Can we drop the cynicism? Can we drop the calculation? Can we drop the not enough? And even if that's there, to not make the not enough not enough. To not be cynical about our cynicism. To not take for granted, to not to not look around for the next thing. The next hit of dopamine. The next way I'm going to entertain myself. This is Ejō again. Fools who hear some, we're grumpy. It's grumpy mode. Fools who hear some talk about radiant light may think that this is like the light of fireflies, like the light of lanterns, like the light of the sun or moon, the gleaming of gold or jewels. They look around for something that they already know. Looking for the blaze of radiance, they concentrate on their little minds and try to figure it out, trying to turn it into the realm of emptiness and silence. So they freeze and hide in motionlessness. They are unable to give up looking for some kind of thing that they can acquire. They are unable to give up looking for some kind of thing that they can acquire. Or they think mystical thoughts and go on and on about how special it is. There are only too many like this, sleeping with open eyes, just bags of borrowed rice. So I'll end with something from Keizan Zenji. This was the author of Transmission of the Light, who wrote, these koans and cases around the enlightenment of these 53 ancestors, ending with Ejō. But before I do that, to just invite this sense of what am I taking for granted? What is right here? How am I creating a sense of not enough around that? That there's something somewhere else, there's some future me or future you or future relationship, future Dharma talk, future practice center. For me, it's often there's that next text that I'm going to read. That'll really open it up. And we're already right in the middle of our lives. So to just relax exactly where we are. And perhaps with some more porosity, really receive the world as it is. Keizan says, there is something that myriad things cannot hide. And even when everything is done away with, there is still something you cannot get rid of. It stands out clearly of itself. Empty and open, it is fundamentally, radiantly aware. Therefore, it is called clean and naked, bare and free. It is also called being clearly awake, everything obvious. And it is called radiant brightness. We call this living. To be awake means having awakened and being alert. Being clear means being bright and lucid. So that last line again, we call this living. To be awake means having awakened and being alert. Being clear means being bright and lucid. Thank you all.